In Abels and Custodero, Chapter 3, Alsop explains the isms we often find in philosophy. Alsop explains that an ism should characterize more than classify. So, in an attempt to better understand the relationships between these different isms, here I will outline some of the characteristics of the more common isms we find in the philosophy of music education. What are some of the isms in music philosophy? While this is certainly not an exhaustive list of the different isms one might encounter in the philosophical world of music education, it does touch on three of the more common isms often used to characterize certain beliefs regarding the purpose of music education. I will address each of the isms in the order in which they appeared in our history. The first ism, as far as we know, would be utilitarianism, though we give it this name much later than it was first being used. Aestheticism entered into the philosophy of music education in the early to mid part of the 20th century. Towards the end of the 20th century, the idea of praxealism emerged as a way of both thinking and doing music, or musicking. So let's take a look at the first of our isms, utilitarianism. Beginning with its basic definition, utilitarianism is a philosophy of music education that promotes teaching music for a purpose outside of music itself. Someone with a utilitarian point of view might choose to teach music in order to strengthen the mind or morality, but not just for the sake of making music. Utilitarianism is our oldest ism and has been the philosophical basis for teaching music for thousands of years. Our first teachers here would be those from ancient Greece. Music was highly valued in ancient Greece. Plato taught in both the Republic and in his Laws that music was an essential part of a balanced education. This is because he, like Socrates, believed and taught that music prepared children to be responsible citizens of the Republic. In the Middle Ages, the Roman scholar Boethius wrote on music as a mathematical science. This, he believed, would assist in understanding the mysteries of the universe through proportions and harmony. The movement of the planets creates pitch, a music of the spheres, but their movements were so great that they were beyond the scope of human hearing. Boethius's book, The Fundamentals of Music, were influential in the shaping of music philosophies for centuries. 1,000 years after Boethius lived, Martin Luther was making waves with his 95 Thesis. Martin Luther was a firm proponent of music education in the schools that he established. He taught that singing good music makes a man more reasonable and well-mannered. In the New World, the integration of music into the schools began, not for the purpose of making music, but for the purpose of improving choral singing in churches. Around the turn of the 19th century, Pestalozzi had introduced some new theories on education in general. These impacted music education in many ways, including some great methodologies, but did not seem to change the ism. Pestalozzi believed that the purpose of education was to elevate three major capacities: the moral, the physical, and the mental faculties. He valued music education because it was able to elevate both the moral and the mental faculties of the student. As music was integrated into our schools across the United States, the utilitarian philosophy continued as the driving force for its promotion. It continues even today as the primary source for most music advocacy campaigns by both institutions and music teachers. Let's return to our list of isms and examine our second ism, aestheticism. So what exactly is aestheticism? This is a much more complicated answer than utilitarianism. In the strictest sense, the word aestheticism comes from the Greek word aesthesis, which means perception or feeling. So we might conclude that it is about our perceived feelings of music. And while this is true, by itself, this is not aestheticism. Our perceived feelings do play a role in aestheticism, but we must also take into account the whys and the hows. Aestheticism is, perhaps, best understood by experiencing it. I will take a page out of Maxine Green's handbook with an aesthetic lesson on a work of art and a poem written as a reflection on this painting. Musée des Beaux-Arts by W.H. Auden. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position. How it takes place, while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone, as it had to on the white legs disappearing into the green water. And the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. The poem suggests that suffering in human lives is at the margins. People would rather not confront, or are outright numb to, the immediate reality of another's pain. This exercise opens the participant up to the possibility of experiencing the art, understanding the why behind the work, and offers the participant a new perspective on the world. In aestheticism, there are also a few additional isms. Representationalism is the idea that the meaning of art lies in its ability to represent the natural world. A problem with this idea comes with the question of how does music imitate or represent nature? Expressionism is the idea of relating feeling to a work, or specifically to music, that music is the language of feelings. A question that often arises with this ism is, are there universals to how one might feel when listening to or performing a piece of music? Will everyone really feel the exact same emotion as the composer? And formalism is the idea that the meaning of a piece is determined by its form. One potential problem with formalism is that if you are unaware of the intended meaning of a form, you are likely to interpret the piece differently than the composer had intended. So who were the leaders in the aestheticism-ism? As I already mentioned, Maxine Green was a proponent of aesthetic education in general, meaning that she was not a composer or musician, but an education philosopher. Bennett Reamer was also a proponent of aestheticism in music education. However, he advocated for a less rigid set of rules when it comes to applying aesthetics to music education. He promoted an idea of a basic set of characteristics that one might use to teach aesthetically. Now, back to our list of isms to examine our final ism, praxealism. Our last ism for our purposes today is praxealism. The word praxi comes from the Greek word which means practice. And so when we think of praxealism, we can think of an action-based approach to music education, one in which we do the things that are required in musicking. But we do need to consider what is necessary to know in order to do the doing. In other words, praxealism is not just the doing, but also thinking about and understanding music in order to make music, in the active reflection on music. This philosophy promotes the idea that every music class should include the performance of music. Making music or musicking is not an individual activity, but one that is social. One point of praxealism that is taught is that there are two major parts. The first is the development of procedural know-how. In other words, learning to technically make the music. And the second is the development of musicianship, or the musical thinking that matches the tradition of the music. This philosophy seems to be tailored to the current secondary music programs at most public schools today, one in which the focus is on the art of performing music or musicking. There are several music philosophers who have written on and promoted the idea of praxealism. The author of the book Music Matters, David Elliott, wrote in great length about praxealism, as did Christopher Small in his book Musicking: The Meaning of Performing and Listening. While there are many other isms that relate to the philosophy of music education, these three have played an important role in forging the path we have all taken towards teaching music today.